Welcome to the show called Let's Talk Homeschool, brought to you by Apologia Educational Ministries. This is the show where we talk about everything homeschooling, the who, what, when, where, why, and how. We want to affirm and encourage you in the decision to homeschool, challenge and inspire you to take it to new heights, and celebrate everything you get to enjoy in this adventure of a lifetime. Today's show is titled Charlie Kirk, A Tribute and a Turning Point. We have guests Ladd and April Lesh with us, and of course me and Rachel. All right, everybody, let's talk homeschool. So on September 10th, Charlie Kirk was murdered, assassinated, and martyred. Lots of conversation has taken place since then. Lots of tributes have been given in his honor. There was a memorial 11 days afterwards, which was a 5-hour worship marathon. We're going to talk about all the things that we've written and talked about and bring it here on the podcast. So let me start with asking Ladd, what were some of your first reactions to September 10th and everything that happened on that day, the shock, the horror, the immediate response of the public, both liberal and conservative, but what were some of your initial reactions?
Well, it was an absolutely tragic day that the whole nation lived through together, and it hit particularly hard on those of us who are Christians that have followed Charlie for so many years, and I mean it was a terrible day. And just a lot of tears shed in our home because you felt like you knew Charlie, and I never personally met him, and yet so many people I talked to that were calling me who had never met him felt like they had lost a family member. He was so loved, and that is so clear from the outpouring that came after. And just the response we've seen has been overwhelming. I mean, this man left a powerful legacy, and the big question is why. And we know why, but some people have ignored that. What's plain in front of him that Charlie was not only a patriot, not only a loving husband, a father, a really model citizen, but he was a follower of Christ that believed, I'm not going to compartmentalize my faith. I'm going to bring my faith into the public sphere and live it out and engage with those that desperately need the gospel and need to hear the truth.
Well, and I think that's some of the discussion that has happened since is, what was his message? And as I was looking at more videos than I ever did before the assassination, I was struck with how he was growing in his Christian faith, just like all of us, where his message was definitely a freedom, pro-USA patriotic movement with, the politics that come with that. But he really started moving much more towards the truth of the gospel because it fits tightly with what it means to be an American, so with the founding, with our values as they were originally set to be. And you really started seeing the gospel play a very big part in his message, which is why many people, and I would agree, that he was martyred because of the Christian aspect of his life, his message, and how he tied the capital T truth with all the politics and other questions, big issues of the day that he was addressing and having conversations with folks. And again, it was fascinating to me when you just see the fact that he was willing to engage in conversation.
Oh, man. I think that's the thing that struck me is, that's one of the things that we valued so much when all of the kids were home was the mealtime conversations. And we've been at your house. We've come to chaos, right? And we were not friends when all of our kids were home, but it was the same thing. That's why I think we feel so comfortable when we come to your house for dinner. It's just like, this is home, right?
The crumbs.
But it's the conversation, it's the engagement. And I think that is so exceptional that you actually have those conversations.
About important things.
Exactly. And I think we've normalized that. We normalized it when our kids were home. You're normalizing it there in your home. I know that you talk about politics. I know you talk about Jesus. I know you talk about hard things, right? And you talk a lot. And that matters. Yeah. But there's a whole other group of people out here who aren't having those conversations. Yeah. And I think your point is so powerful that he was daring to do what we should all be doing. We should be having these conversations in our home, and it's not always comfortable. I, too, have watched more than a few Charlie videos since he has passed, and I'm just struck with how he sits there and pauses sometimes before he engages, but he's also so very prepared to have these conversations. So respectful. Yeah.
And you can see the wheels turning. He already knows what he's going to say. It's like he has an answer ready. And yet he gives them time. He gave them the microphone, and then he respectfully and kindly just tears the arguments apart. And I think, like what you were saying a minute ago, the people who have followed him for many years saw a change in just the last few years where it was not just politics. And he was always a Christian, and he would mention that, but he was always reasoning with like logic and reason and constitution. And then just a few years ago, it was like a change started happening where he was so much theology, and it was almost like preaching. And I was listening to some of the Turning Point people a few days ago, and they said, we didn't realize until after he died. We were saying it was like, prove me wrong, debates, but they said what it really was is tent revivals, complete with a tent on a college campus, because he said that's really the message, and that's where his popularity started coming bigger, I think, because young people, and especially young men, were seeing someone who was actually willing to say the truth, to not back down, and to tie their faith with everything else in life, which is exactly how we should be doing. It should be tied to everything, because our theology matters, and our theology affects every single part of life. You can't escape it.
He was also humble enough to know when he needed more training, more education, and to seek out wise counselors and those that had been trained and ahead of them in their craft, like Frank Turek, to really mentor him. And that's an unusual thing in today's world, where we think we're born with knowing everything, or we're taught, you younger folks rule the day. He was young though, and he was not going to be despised for his youth, but he wanted to seek out godly counsel.
Right. Well, and it's fascinating on his education. He went to college for part of one semester, dropped out, and was actually encouraged to drop out because you got way too much to offer, and ended up writing a book, College is a Scam.
Yes. Which is sold out right now. I tried to put it in my Amazon cart.
I'm sure that's true.
I saw some copies that were like $700 on eBay.
Oh,
wow. You can still find it for like $30. But,
okay.
Well, and the thing is, he clearly valued education.
Yes.
And as homeschool families, that really resonates with us, because our kids went to college, but we really valued learning the information, learning what you're actually gaining a virtuous life, and understanding what the truth is, and what's real and what's not. And so many of our kids that have been through college are with other students who aren't there to learn.
Right,
They're not there to get an
exactly.
education.
Yeah.
There's the partiers.
Yeah.
There's the people that have never read classic literature, classic books, probably not even the Bible. But Charlie was a reader. He was seeking out the mentors, like you said. I actually heard from Hillsdale's president, Larry Arnn, that he took their Constitution course 24 times.
No, it was 100 times. He took it over 100 times.
It was some ridiculous number amount, and other courses, because he was constantly looking for places to learn, to improve, and one of the best ways is seeking out a good mentor / teacher / coach, or do reading on your own. Read the actual original pieces yourself.
Right. Yeah.
And as a result, he was
Brilliant.
Clearly smart and knowledgeable on the topics he was discussing.
Well, and as we talked many times before on this podcast, schooling does not equal education.
It does not.
And we've bought into this lie that's been fed us for so long, that it's your credentials, it's your degree, it's how many years you have it.
Charlie wasn't getting graded on any of that stuff.
No.
It wasn't about a grade.
Certainly those credentials can be important. It's what you're doing with them, and it's what you learned along the way, and how you were educated. And so I think he was just a real model for how to study and learn and pursue knowledge.
And that continuing education, right?
Yes.
I mean, he continued to engage.
Never stopped.
And that's what I think as homeschoolers we really have an opportunity is to light that fire, to fan those flames, to give them good literature, to read with them, to encourage them to read. help them chase their dreams and their interest. And we have an opportunity to give our kids something that most kids in the government, it like kills their joy of learning.
Yes.
And we have the opportunity to fan those flames. And I think that can make the difference in our culture today.
Yeah. I was watching some of his friends say how he got to learn so much, and some of the people at Turning Point, they said he would invite someone like a mentor. So he picked mentors in different fields. So a political person, a theological person, and he had multiple people in different fields. He would pick somebody, invite them over, and they would come to TV USA and like be on his broadcast show or whatever. And then he would go to Charlie's house, and he would set up a whiteboard and say, just give me a lesson. And he would get out a pen and paper, like a spiral notebook, and just take notes after notes after notes. They said afterwards he would have pages and pages, and it would be hours of them with a whiteboard. It's so simple. It's so basic. It's not like, people on big screen shows and everything. It was literally just teaching, and he was willing to learn instead of thinking he knew everything and had all the answers. So I think that's one of the keys, is having that love of knowledge and that desire for it, and also realizing that you don't know everything. And that makes people actually able to learn more, because they're not stubborn in their mind, like, oh, I've got everything figured out.
But related to that, he was a man on a mission. And his mission was to deliver truth to these kids on these campuses, and to dare to do what it didn't seem like anybody in their lives were willing to do, and that is field the tough questions.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that I think we have the benefit of in homeschool families, is to dare to welcome those questions from our kids.
That's right.
Because we can shut our kids down. They can come up with a question, and our kids know what's going to make us squirm. And they can come up with a question, and we can prove them right. Yeah, that question's not welcome. Or we can say, I don't know, but we can find it together. Or, wow, that's a big one. Let's see how we can unpack that. Where's this coming from? And have those tough conversations.
Yeah.
And welcome those same questions from their friends.
That's right.
I think those are opportunities that we have in a very unique way in our homes as homeschool families.
100%. Charlie was a big advocate of homeschooling, which is near and dear to our heart.
Yeah.
And Vodi Balcom, a wonderful man of God who's now in heaven with Charlie.
Yeah.
And it's been a tough couple weeks, but he actually said, education is discipleship. Whoever is educating your children is discipling them. Yeah. And we as parents have been given this incredible opportunity with our children as souls entrusted to us by God. And we are teaching them, whether we're being intentional or not. They are learning. They are like sponges. And we have a short window, a short opportunity. And what are we educating? Where are we headed? If education is discipleship, are we seeking truth from Scripture, and are we picking up the mantle and as our primary responsibility before God?
Right. Well, and one of his other quotes on homeschooling was that he said that my money's on the homeschool kids. They're going to be the ones running society.
Yes.
And he was a young man. He was 31 years old, but he was seeing the beauty and the value and the potential of homeschooling. I suspect he probably would have homeschooled his own kids down the road eventually. And it's interesting too that I tend to think that in a way he home educated himself.
He did.
Oh, for sure.
And to everything we're already saying, that's an attitude we can instill in our own kids. That love of learning, that love of reading, and the value of finding others that we can bring into our life as mentors to teach me this subject that you're an expert on.
Yeah.
But all this ties into another thing Charlie clearly vowed, and that was family. And as a homeschool families, that's pretty important for us too. We're going to spend a lot of time together with our kids around the table, talking, cleaning, working, living, doing all of life. And I loved the messages that he was giving to young men and young women to get married and have kids.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's as simple as that sometimes.
Yeah.
And yet that's also a profound message these days, because so many kids that are in their 20s don't want to get married. They're fearful of getting married. They're fearful
Or they're
of
taught to
commitment.
put it off.
Right.
To
They
get a
don't
career
want kids.
first.
They're afraid of kids.
Yeah.
They want to have 0 or 1 kid for reasons that don't make sense if you have the conversation. And so again, these are messages that as homeschool families don't leave to the world around your kids to give them. Be the ones to share with them your vision.
Right.
What God would intend for them, and have them ask the question, what does God want for you in terms of family life?
Yeah,
That's right.
Yeah, I saw a video of Charlie teaching his little girl, which was like a year and a half old, about like, it was like everything will tend to wear down, or like thermodynamics or something.
Yeah.
And he was showing, dropping her cup, about gravity. And obviously she's not getting it. She was like 18 months old. But it reminded me of stuff that you do with the kids, because it's, even though a young kid isn't getting a lot of stuff, it's over their head, you're still treating them respectfully and like engaging them. And so like Lad, he will do hard topics and try to teach them, even though 90% of it might be missed. It's giving them that respect and saying like, I'm going to bring you up on this level and teach you these hard things, and you'll learn more and more about it as you get older. And that's just part of parenting, but it's a part that many parents have just abdicated, or they don't want to deal with it, so they send their kids off, for someone else to teach and train, and then they wonder why the kid is, not following their values or not following what they think they've been teaching them at home, and yet it's not really, because they're not having those conversations.
Yeah, parents can shut down those conversations by talking down to their children, belittling them, not raising them up.
Yeah.
And I do think, a lot of times we tend to procrastinate on, what we know we need to do, and yet we think there's going to be another day. But we know how quickly they grow up.
It's
and
true.
We have a very short window of time with our children. So are we stewarding and shepherding our families as God has directed us?
Well, I tend to view homeschooling as the most valuable, the most significant cultural, spiritual movement of the last 50 years. And then with Charlie Kirk's assassination and the worship service that followed 11 days later, the name of his organization was perfectly fitting for what a lot of people are saying it might be happening right now, that it's a turning point in our country, maybe in the Christian community, maybe among other people, to where we could maybe have a revival and awakening that many people have been praying for. But what would that look like for Christian homeschool families? What would we do differently? What could we envision and help encourage to happen, so that this isn't all in vain, and 3 months from now it's old news and we're moving on and just doing things the same way we've always done them?
I think one thing you touched on a minute ago is that he was a man on a mission. And I think helping your children find their mission in life, and as Christians, all of us have the same mission, but in different roles, different spheres. And so our mission, this is what Charlie said himself. He said, my mission is to fight evil. This is why God has put me on the earth. And he was very clear, and he did the things that he thought would be most effective to help him fight evil. And he even said, there are many different spheres and different people in different roles. And so he said, the body of Christ has people, there's pastors, there's teachers, there's leaders, there's electricians, plumbers. Everybody has their circles. And yet, if you find your mission and you seek to fulfill it to the best of your ability, we all have the same goal, and that is teaching, training our children and helping them to be lights to the world in a dark world, and to fight evil in whatever way that they can in their circles. And so I see a lot of kids that I've looked over the years that are now young adults, and they seem purposeless. There's a lot of just drifting. There's addiction to social media. There's just almost like a mind-numbing, what are we doing with our life? And they waste their life away. And that is shifting in a lot of young people, and I think largely because of Charlie Kirk and people like him who are saying, you have a purpose in life, and it's bigger than just you, and it's bigger than just pleasure and fulfilling yourself. It's to fight evil. And I think as Christians, we need to be having those conversations with our children. Like, there's something bigger going on. There's spiritual dimensions in our life that people tend to ignore.
One huge countercultural message I don't think we can say enough to our children is, what if it's not about you?
That's right.
Because your life is really not your own. And I know that as a homeschool mom, boy, I felt that a lot. This was not, if you've watched the podcast at all, this was not my life plan, right? This was a God thing. But how glorious it has been that it wasn't about me. I mean, that would have been miserable for my life to have been about me. But to talk to our children about the beauty and the liberation that comes when you don't live for you, and when you live for something higher. And that's clearly what he was doing. And even Erika, I think she gets, even in her pain and her incredible loss, I think she gets that that's what this was about, that he was not living for him, and that this was, in somewhere, this was necessary in God's sovereign plan. And I think we really need to continue to pray for her, but also pray for our children, that our children will catch the vision that this is about living for him.
And the lack of fear. I feel like for millions of people that I was following or even just half-heartedly saw, from time to time on social media, there was like a change where they were like, we are not afraid anymore. And it's people from all walks of life. Yep. Like I follow a bunch of farmers that, they're Christian, they might have a Bible verse on their page or whatever, but I saw a ton of people who are like, they've always been just selling, meat or chickens or whatever. And all of a sudden they're like, I don't care. Like, I'm a Christian. If you don't want to be on my page, that's fine. But I'm going to say what I believe. And there was a huge, just like onslaught of people that are just saying, I'm going to stand up and speak the truth, because they realize there's some things worse than dying. Yeah. There's things that are worth dying for. And I think in our culture where we've been so comfortable and Christianity has been fairly easy and not so much attacked, that we've lost sight of that. And now it's like we're realizing, you know what? He died for a cause, and it's awful that he died. It's tragic, and yet he was willing to take that stand, and look where he is now. He's in heaven. And so they see for just a minute a picture of eternity, and like, wow, he's not gone. He's in heaven. So I can stand up too, because the worst that can happen is, like Paul said, to live is Christ, to die is gain.
That's right.
And
if you had told me in the 90s as a homeschooler, the only one listening to Rush Limbaugh, my friend group, it was a very lonely time in the 90s, that the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State,
of War now.
the Secretary of War, the Secretary of State, the VP would actually be giving the gospel message in front of an audience, that you would have, Benny Johnson giving a Romans 13 exhortation to the entire, cabinet on their role to be righteous. When is the last time you've heard, a pastor give that? It is just remarkable. But Tom Buck gave a good ex-post. He said, Charlie Kirk's death will be used both by God for good purposes and by Satan for evil purposes. One way to distinguish which is at play: the former will advance sound doctrine and the true gospel. The latter will undermine sound doctrine and the true gospel. And you're going to see a lot of people coming with bad intentions and using this moment for selfish gain or an evil play, and then you're going to see the true gospel advancing. Yeah. And I think one way, obviously, it's going to be a work of the Holy Spirit, but and it's going to be with the true gospel going forth, and then true faith and true redemption happening in our hearts, that then go and affect our outward life. And I think, one thing is, most of us will never have the influence of Charlie Kirk. We'll never even dream of having that influence. But we do have influence. We have influence in our spheres, in our families, at our churches, in our workplaces. And how are you living out the gospel for Christ? And maybe doing, Lord, search my heart in this moment. What it's a lot easier to look outward and saying, this is wrong. Sure. But what about in my own family? What in my own life? What am I doing to follow Christ and actually repent and live in sanctification?
But Lad, I think you're really hitting on it. I think, how do we not ride the wave, but how do we maintain? How do we keep this fire that's been ignited, right? In a very real way, more by his assassination than even in his ministry, right? Which is, how do we not squander this? I think there are a lot of people, I think we're versed in worldview and in the gospel ourselves. We're pretty passionate people. But to the average homeschool dad or mom out there, what do you say? I think people want to know, what do I do? I get it. I want to be a part of it. I want to be intentional, but what do I do?
Well, I think, what April was saying about Charlie, he lived on a very focused mission to resist evil, to stop evil. And it reminds me of the Colson Fellows program that Rachel and I went through. And there were 4 questions they encouraged us to ask, which can help anybody come up with their own call that God is putting on their heart. The first is, what is good in our culture that we can promote, protect, or celebrate? homeschooling is one that I can think of. What's missing in our culture that we can creatively contribute or add or bring back to our culture? Well, family life, and homeschooling is a great way to bring family life back into the discipleship world. A third question, what's broken in our culture that needs to be restored? I would say the public school system is beyond repair, but so the best way there is opt out, homeschooling again. It seems like I'm a homeschool advocate. And then the fourth question is, what is evil in our culture that we need to stop or resist? And Charlie was clearly in that battle ground. But any one of those questions can start you down a path of saying, well, I have a gift of this or a calling of this or a passion for this, that can be your focus. That can be your kid's focus. And that's a much better question to ask than, what kind of work do you think you'd find satisfying or rewarding or enriching? No, what is God calling you to do?
How can you
That's
serve
a much
God,
better way to ask the question.
with your giftings. I like one thing Charlie said. Very often he would say, it takes no talent to be courageous. Like, you might not be a great speaker, you might not be a great, orator or politician, whatever, but it takes no talent to be courageous. All you have to do is just say, I am going to speak the truth. And he said, when I go into a college campus, I tell myself, I have basically one thing: I will speak the truth. I will not back down from, speaking the gospel, the hard questions. And it makes your life simpler in a way. And it gives you that freedom to, you don't feel that pressure, because if you already know where you're going to stand, you don't have to figure out the answer. Like, what am I going to do if they say this? You already know. It's like, that decision has to be made way before. And so this would apply to parents in the workforce or whatever, situations that might come up in their office building or whatever, where there's pressure to like hide your faith or whatever. If they make that decision and then their children see that and they tell their children, listen to what happened to me at work today and listen to what I was able to do to make a stand. And then they're teaching their children, so that when their children are at colleges or in, homeschool PE events or whatever it is, where they might face similar situations, they already know what to do. And it's those little decisions that make a successful Christian life more than, what am I going to do, for a job or whatever.
Well, I remember when our kids were young, in the mid to late 90s, we're early in our homeschool journey, and a question I would ask the kids at the dinner table is, what if homeschooling became illegal? Should we still do this? And you see the kids going, oh man, I don't know. What would we do, Dad? And Rachel and I would tell them, we're going to keep homeschooling, even if it became illegal. Part of that was to tell ourselves that's ground we're going to stand on. But it was also to let our kids know, this is a commitment we're making as a family. We're like in this. This is so important. We're going to do what we can to protect it, to promote it, to resist the forces against it. But it was a great exercise and conversation for our own family. Fortunately, that never happened, but I was unemployed for almost 2 years once, and there were so many people that said, you need to just stop homeschooling for a while. Take a break there, because this is too hard. You got to get back in the income game. But that was a great time where we told our kids, we're going to homeschool. This is actually one of the best times to homeschool. We need to stay together as a family. God will provide the job and the rest of it, but it's questions like that that we can engage with our kids to get them, have them feel a part of something important.
For too long, Christianity has been compartmentalized. Bifurcated from our life. We love Jesus, but how do we actually live those out in the different spheres? And how do we bring all of Christ for all of life and actually live it out? And Charlie was a wonderful model in that. He would work harder than any of his team, and then he'd close up his phone and he'd go home and he'd be a father and a husband.
I love that.
And he was not neglecting his family because he had an enormous job to do. And on Sundays he would close up the work and actually take a Sabbath rest and be at church. These are I think just aspects of his character, and we cannot separate who Christ is and then the workings out of that as we're salt and light, and we're not to be hidden. And I think for too long the church overall has so compartmentalized this that we've really neglected the whole counsel of God and the application of that in all of life.
Rachel and I love to take a day every 7 to step away, worship, be in nature, just sit on the front porch and take it in, have good conversations. But one of the things that really impressed me about the way Charlie took a Sabbath was it was largely a tech fast. He'd step away from his phone. But the way he worded it was, this is 24 hours where I'm not receiving anything from the world. And I'm not giving anything to the world. And that was a really big insight for me personally, because even on our day off, I'll tend to receive things from the world. And it's really got me to think, okay, what are some good ways that I can take a break from the world yelling at me and giving me information?
All the news.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's so powerful to me is just his fearlessness. And not fearlessness like the world talks about being fearless. I think there's a bumper sticker that says fearless. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, his fear was so obviously placed in the God of the universe, that he was able, because he knew they wanted him dead. He knew that.
Sure did.
That there are several ones of his videos and he goes, they want me dead. And he knew that. He knew that there were threats. He knew that he had a target on his back. He knew that. So he wasn't acting flippantly about this. He took it very, very serious. But he knew who God was, and he knew what he was called to do. And so he could do it with a level of fearlessness. And I think we would agree. I mean, I know all your kids, and you know all my kids. Man, I would hope that they could stand like that, that they would dare. I mean, that's the ultimate, right? It's not an SAT score like so many people think. I don't think we should reduce what we're doing in home education to some standardized tests. Yeah, I mean, what a low bar is that?
Right.
But that they would stand firmly on the cause of Christ and stand fearlessly and be able to give an answer for the hope that lies within them. I mean, at the end of the day, that's the most important thing that they could ever do.
Well, it made me think, what if I had to have bodyguards? What if you had to have bodyguards?
Yeah.
What if what we were doing at Apologia, in our home, in our family, at our church, was so dangerous that we actually had to have bodyguards when we went on a walk around the neighborhood? That changes a lot of the thinking. We can't. Most people can't relate to that level of actual death threats that obviously one was played out. But it does teach us a lesson that we need to stand strong and we need to be fearless, as you're saying, and stand on the solid rock of Jesus. The ultimate truth. And I hope that's a good takeaway for some people to really contemplate and sit in for a little bit, so that things can be different in their personal life and their walk with God, as well as their family life, their parenting life, their homeschool life, work life, everything.
There's one quote that I like by Matt Walsh. We were listening to him like a day or two after the assassination, and he said all these evil people that were celebrating, which is just mind-blowing.
Yeah, I couldn't
because
believe it.
there are many political figures I disagree with, but the idea of celebrating someone's assassination, no matter who they are, is just, it shows a very clear picture of light versus darkness. But he said, I hope that we all live our lives in such a way that demons dance on our grave and that they celebrate when we are dead, because we've done such a great work in the world for the cause of truth. And I think that's the way a Christian ought to live our lives. And we obviously don't always see the very stark, like dark and evil, dark and light, in our own lives, because we're just spending our days going to the grocery store, buying food, cooking supper, all of that. And yet there is spiritual warfare going on for our hearts, our souls, and our children's souls. And so to be able to get a glimpse of that and say, I want to live my life and I want to train my children to where not only are we prepared to die and willing to die for what is true and what is right, but also that we've put such a dent in our little circles that the devil is like relieved when we're gone. Like, shoot,
Exactly.
I took one off the field. And it's not the same as pursuing success and money and fame and all that. It is just, it's a spiritual awakening of this is what we're really living for. And it gives you a stronger sense of purpose and your identity, because your identity is in Christ.
Yes.
And it changes everything.
Yeah, it all comes back to Jesus Christ.
It does.
It has to be about Jesus and the gospel, and that he is Lord of Lords and King of Kings. And the Bible is the Word of God and the truth, and that we were created in God's image.
Yeah.
And he created us male and female. And he created marriage and the family and government and work and all of that flows out of that reality. And so, I mean, it's one of the reasons why at Apologia we are a creation-based science, because we are not about teaching your kids evolution and that this whole life means nothing,
Right.
or that we came from nothing. You're created in the image of God, and that has real world implications.
It does.
Yeah,
Clearly.
all the issues that are political issues and that are science and medical and all this stuff, they're actually all theological issues.
They are.
Every single thing can come down to a theological issue. And so why aren't Christians speaking out? Why aren't Christians connecting the dots and saying, okay, this is not just a reason and logic, or, this is for the scientists, this is for the doctors. This is for Christians. Every area of life. It's like Abraham Kuyper said, there's not one square inch of all creation that which Christ does not say mine.
Exactly.
It's all his. And so to live with that mindset is just, it's life-changing, and it's life-giving for Christians to have that sense of purpose.
There are people who are oppressed by lies that are waiting to be set free. And we have the truth.
Yeah.
Because we know the truth that we have will set them free. And I, over and over in these videos that I've watched, you see these kids come up to the mic and they're so ticked. And they're so captive by the lies of the enemy.
Right.
And he engages with them so powerfully. And so many of them walk away changed. Maybe not completely turned the corner, but he's given them something to chew on. And that's a powerful thing. And we have the opportunity to do that every day.
We have an opportunity to speak truth in love, and to do it with humility.
Yep.
Right now we're reading Greg Koukle's Tactics.
Oh, yeah.
Great book.
Great book.
One of
Yeah.
Charlie's
I think
favorites, too.
Charlie enjoyed that one.
Yeah.
And,
Is that the one where you just put a stone in their shoe?
That's right.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's so good.
But
Yeah.
asking good questions, and doing it in a way that always,
Makes
is
them
about
think.
the big picture.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But again, we if we're not speaking the truth, what are we doing here, Christians?
Yeah.
I mean, someone who went to a seminary I actually really respect was telling me a story. He said when Roe v. Wade came out in 1973, evil, just absolutely, ground shaking event in our culture.
Yeah.
And he said at the seminary, nothing was mentioned. No mention of it at all. Because again, that's the political realm.
It's bifurcated.
That doesn't, and that is, I think, going to the heart of pastors. Are you going to stand up and start preaching the whole counsel of God? Not asking for a political rally, by no means, but are you going to preach it and preach it, where it applies to our cultural moment?
Yes.
And challenging our leaders to be righteous in the sight of God.
And the churches have got to be prepared.
They're not, though.
And so many are not
They
prepared.
are not.
They think
Are
that there's
they ready for an onslaught
of new Christians,
Christians
looking
coming
for
in?
boldness, and they think there's like a third way that's like a middle ground. It doesn't exist.
It doesn't.
Between light and darkness, good and evil, there's not a middle ground. That doesn't mean you can't have friends and reach across the aisle, but you can't waver in your commitment to truth. I was debating on Facebook with one of my friends who was basically, I don't know exactly what the point was, but she sent me a podcast that wanted me to listen to have like a more balanced approach to my, celebration of Charlie.
You need more balance.
And the person on the podcast said, this was two Christian guys.
Okay.
We have friends on both sides of the aisle. They use this exact word. We have friends lionizing Charlie and friends celebrating the assassination. They use the word celebrating twice. And as I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, you are Christians and you have friends that are celebrating an assassination. You've got some evil friends.
Yeah.
Like there's no, and they acted like they were, middle of the road. Like,
Isn't this
rational.
great? This is where we all need to be.
Yeah,
And it's like, no.
It's like, no, Christians have to be on the side of truth and what is right. And it's beyond time. When I was writing that article about Charlie Kirk for the Apologia blog, I wrote something along the lines of like, the hour has come, and then I said, indeed, it is now past, actually,
Yes.
for Christians to stand up. I mean, it's beyond time. This is how we got into this situation with our country, is by silence and complacency.
Not recognizing those moments.
Exactly.
Right.
So as we wrap up this conversation, I want to give all four of us a chance to say some kind of closing comment. And just to wrap up, this is a tribute to Charlie. This is a discussion about the turning point in our country and in our communities because of the event and the worship service that kind of signaled that. So we've talked a lot about his life. We've talked a lot about what we can do. We've talked a lot about the truth and the gospel and the importance of Jesus Christ as the foundation of everything, and how everything, all of life meshes together. And so a lot of good discussion, but let's wrap it up with some closing thoughts that each of us we would want to say to help put a nice exclamation point on our discussion.
Yeah, I would say, Mom, Dad, don't stop learning yourselves. Don't stop engaging. I think it's really easy. And of course, we've launched everybody now. It'd be really easy. And people have encouraged us to get on with retirement, right? And to get on with, I don't know, doing nothing. I'm not about that. And no matter where you are in your educational journey with your kids and with your walk with Jesus, it's not too late for you to learn more. There's so many great resources. Know the gospel message, know how to share the gospel message, know truth and know lies, hone your discernment skills, and dare to lean in and learn more about the Constitution. And don't stop learning yourself. And with passion, share that with your children. I think one of the things that really inspired me about Charlie was how intentional he was to continue to engage and to continue sharpening his sword. Mm-hmm. And it's so easy to get it sharp one time and think once is enough. But I think we need to continually not only learn how to wield our swords, but to continually sharpen them.
That's good.
Yeah, I think kind of along the same lines, us learning and then teaching our children to learn, giving them the right tools. I printed off a book list of some of Charlie's favorite books.
Me too.
So, and a lot of them are political issues,
Sure.
just like things of the day. But then there's a lot of history and, the Constitution and then theology and learning how to share and defend your faith. And so I am, in my mind, compiling a book list that I want my children to read.
Sure.
Based on some of those books. My older kids that are in high school can read those actual ones. And then for my younger ones, I want them to learn how to speak well and how to give an answer for the faith. And that doesn't mean everybody's going to be, Charlie Kirk out in the middle of, I don't want to go on a college campus personally, but just being able to answer well. And so that's kind of what has been a shift in my homeschool as far as what can I do, for my children. I want them, of course, we always read. We read a ton, but I want them to read specifically more Constitution, more history, more government, more current events, and also more theology and how to just defend your faith, which is something that we actually have a passion for anyway. And I feel like Lad does that beautifully. Yeah. Every night we have very long family devotions. I'm talking 3 hours sometimes. And he has a whiteboard and he will go through current events, history, politics, whatever is a topic of the day. And the kids get genuinely interested because it's something that he's interested in. Yeah. So I guess my advice for parents is also cultivate an interest yourself in some of these things. Don't live kind of passionless. You may not be interested in politics, but you're interested in something. Yeah. And so sharing that interest with your kids and how it relates to your faith, I think is an excellent idea for parents, because it's something that we have seen bear a lot of fruit in our family life. And it's also fun. It bonds us together because we know what we're talking about. Hey, what are you going to teach us about tonight? And he's got a very varied interest. We're reading David Copperfield along the same time.
It's a long book.
Reading tactics. It's a great book, though.
I feel like I'm living the whole life of David Copperfield.
I love it. I love it.
But we go through either a classical, then he's doing tactics out loud with the kids at night, and then a history book, and then the Bible. And there's just we're always switching it up with different things. But it's something that has been such a benefit to our family, and I wish every family could find the time, carve out the time to do something like that. So that's my advice.
Well, young men, marry a godly woman. You're an amazing mother.
Thank you.
And I think, for this moment, we could ask ourselves, well, will it be wasted? And I think it comes down to asking yourself that question. Are you going to, waste this kind of moment where, it hit hard, but it is a wake-up call. For the Christian. Titus 2:12 says, "For the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people, training us to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in the present age." So when you trust in Christ, get ready. What a journey.
Yeah.
Because it is going to impact everything that you do.
Yeah, and it should.
Absolutely.
It should. It really should.
Well, one of the things Charlie said that was actually on the wall at the Heritage Foundation in D.C. Charlie said, get married, have children.
Amen.
And specifically, he said, have more children than you can afford, which I
Amen.
thought was an interesting twist on it.
I think we both have succeeded on
I
that.
think we did that. Yeah.
Build a legacy, pass down your values, pursue the eternal, and seek true joy. And that really resonated with me because I've given our own kids, and when I speak at homeschool conferences, a very similar message. Here's how my message is slightly changed. Get married, we're the same there. I say have as many children as God would send. Homeschool. And then I summarize it with, and then make the love and knowledge of God paramount in your marriage, your parenting, and the education of your children. Some other details to that with children. My motto when we were having kids was one at a time, and it's not a contest. And yet I would still encourage people to have as many as God would send, largely because it's a walk of faith. And we did a talk recently about the birth dearth and this whole topic. But that would be a big part of what I would say. And yet we're grandparents now. And so I have a new message on children, and that is when it comes to grandchildren, have as many as possible. We love grandchildren.
Fun, right?
We love grandchildren. Right. And so a lot of this boils down to family life. And again, homeschooling is a great application, a great way to live as a family too, so that you can disciple your kids. Because it's also a marriage project. I mean, this enhanced our marriage. The decision to homeschool enhanced our marriage in ways we could have never predicted because we had to be on the same page. We had to have meetings. We had to say, well, what are we doing about this? Oh, you need me to find a new math curriculum? Oh, okay, I got something to do. You want me to read these books? Love reading these books to the kids at night. But it was a project in so many ways that we did together, uniting our marriage. And then we're seeing the fruit of our own kids raising their kids and wanting to homeschool. And one of our kids recently, who has two young kids, 3 and a 1-year-old, and she said, I never really saw myself homeschooling, but I can't imagine giving these kids to anybody else. And you already see that desire to homeschool, being built with enough time to be ready when the time comes, because there's fear, even for a kid who was homeschooled. When you saw your mom and dad homeschool, you were homeschooled, but now it's your turn. It can still be scary. It can still be overwhelming. But again, the beauty of it is it's a walk of faith. And the more we do things that require faith, then the more we can love and trust God in ways that I thought I was done with that once I was saved. But a lifetime of faith is beautiful.
Well, and that gets back to the whole idea of courage. And that's really what we saw in his life is the courage to be courageous for the cause of Christ.
Yes.
So thank you all for this conversation, and thank you all for listening. Thank you for watching. This has been Let's Talk Homeschool, brought to you by Apologia Educational Ministries. We've been your hosts, Davis and Rachael Carman, along with our guests, Lad and April Lesh. And as always, we are walking by faith and enjoying the homeschooling adventure of a lifetime.